Hey guys, and welcome to the Tarot Self Therapy course. I hope that you guys have been enjoying the course so far, and I'm super excited to get into this week because it is a really big subject, and it's a subject that has captivated me for quite a long time. I've been working with dreams personally, without the use of tarot for pretty much my whole life. I've been interested in my dreams. I've always been somebody who has had a lot of dreams, and I remember very vivid dreams from my childhood, and I feel like a lot of you guys are probably similar, or that you have had powerful dreams as well, because I feel that people who are just kind of naturally drawn to things like tarot and spirituality and divination. Usually these are people who are creatively minded or who have, some kind of connection with their intuition. So I feel like it's just a really great subject to look at. It is something that I do use tarot cards for. However, I do have to say that I don't use tarot cards every time that I interpret my dreams. I really typically tend to use them more as kind of clarifiers or something to kind of give me more of a foundation. If a particular dream is really confusing to me, then I will use the tarot cards for each kind of symbol, which I'll go over in this video. Or I will do a big spread, not a big spread, but just a spread at the end of my dream interpretation process, just to make sure that there isn't anything that I missed or anything that I hadn't thought of that wants to be relayed to me. But like I said, if I'm working through the dream in the way that I usually do it, I don't need to rely on the tarot cards. I feel that for me, they're more something extra that's kind of for fun or maybe extra clarification. But you can use them as your primary mode of interpreting your dreams if that's just what you feel drawn to do. So there's really, there's no limit and there's no kind of rules or anything in regards to how you interpret your dreams. I feel like what really matters at the root of all of this is that if your interpretation of your dream or what you feel that your dream means for you, if it rings true to you, if a final interpretation just kind of hits you in some spot where you might feel it a little bit in your chest, like a feeling of lightness or maybe a vibrational kind of feeling in your body, like that's resonating, that's ringing true, that's what you're meant to go off of. I feel that no interpretation of your dream is accurate unless it makes sense for you and helps you in some way in your life. So that's always how I look at dreams. And so I hope that me offering kind of my own strategies and thoughts on this matter will serve to give you some kind of foundational point or some jumping off point that you can go ahead and make it your own. That's kind of where I'm coming from with it. I hope that this just kind of gives you something to look at, see how somebody else does it, and, follow your own path. So I wanted to begin with just a little introduction into this style of dream interpretation. The style of interpretation that I use is inspired by Carl Jung. I have learned a lot of what I know about dream interpretation specifically from reading his books. There's some volumes where he talks about it more than in others, and there's also the book Dreams by Carl Jung that is like a compilation of different lectures and things that he's written or said about dreams and working with dreams. So that's been a really big source of inspiration for me. There's a lot of approaches to working with dreams, which I've already mentioned. Some of them are more like fixed symbols, so you can go and look up, a symbol in an online dictionary, for example, and they'll tell you, what it means to dream of losing your teeth or, whatever. And those can be, fun to do. They can be interesting to look at. But ultimately, I find that, at least for myself, the most accurate dream interpretations, the ones that have been transformative for me in my life, those have not come from like symbols that have an externalized sort of definition, like, oh, this is what it means. I find that symbols are very personal. So you might dream of one thing, and for one person, it could mean something totally different than what it means for you. But there are certain things that are collective. Like there are certain dream motifs that we all tend to kind of dream about. So it's tempting to kind of go look at, oh, what does it mean if you dream that your teeth are falling out? It can be like tempting to do that. But I find that for this process, at least, it works better, in my experience, to work through the dream on your own first, and then you can look at all that stuff afterwards. But at least with this method, I always look to my own subconscious to supply the sort of answers that I'm looking for. I don't look for them from an external source. So there's also an author, he's a Jungian psychoanalyst named Robert Johnson, who has also influenced me a lot on this topic. So if you want to look for any books, if this is a subject that fascinates you, those would be two directions that I would point you in, Carl Jung and Robert Johnson, to go deeper with this. But the benefits I find with the way that I interpret dreams are that I feel like since I started interpreting my dreams this way, which it's been a couple of years now, that I've gotten really serious about it, and I spend a lot more time on my dreams, and I go very much more in depth than I ever have before in my life. Since I've been using this much more in-depth process, I have had a lot more specific guidance from my dreams. So there's some styles of dream interpretation where it's kind of like you just write down the dream and you just sort of intuitively guess what you feel like it means. This process that I'm going to take you guys through in this video is not that. This is a much more detailed process, and it's almost kind of scientific in a way. So it requires that you write down every detail that you can recall of your dream. And don't worry about if you forgot some things. If you're in the morning and you're just getting up and you write down your dreams and you're just not sure, don't waste a lot of time thinking, trying to remember. Just keep your pen moving. That's the first kind of step, is write down the whole dream in as much detail as possible. And I can say that, but typically people don't really understand like that I literally mean every single detail that you can recall. So if you are in a room in the dream, for example, it's really important to record the color of the walls, if you can remember them, who else was in the room, anything that you noticed that was on the walls, or kind of what material the table was made out of that you were sitting on, if you can remember that, because your subconscious has access to an infinite number of symbols, right? So the fact that you dream of something as specific as, a blue table, that has significance, that there's a meaning in that, both within the color blue for you, so whatever shade it was, whatever material the table was, how big or small the table was, if it was not a normal size. All of this stuff will tell you something using this method. So it's really important to write down the dream in as much detail as possible, literally as much detail as you can get down. And then you just kind of go through the process of creating associations to each of those symbols. So I just brought a kind of sample dream that I wanted to share with you guys. It's pretty short, which is why I chose this one, because it's a real dream that I actually did have. And I wanted to kind of show it to you guys so that you get a sense of what is involved in the different sort of parts of the process. And so I'm just going to go ahead and show you. So I have a lot of journals. Actually, I was going to show you guys. These are all dream journals. And what I do is I go through the whole dream. I just write it down in pen. And then I will take a highlighter and highlight the symbols that stand out to me in the dream. So, for example, when you write down, like, this is the section of the dream, and then the parts that I've highlighted are like nouns, for example, or images, or something that is symbolic that I can say, okay, that in itself is a symbol. So this gets easier when you actually kind of like see it in process. But basically, I had a dream, this was over a year ago, that it was a time in my life where I was starting to experience more specific psychic kind of things in my work, and there were things that kind of came up around that almost kind of made me feel a little bit insecure. So I'm just giving you guys this background so that you know like why, because it's all important. Like the context of the dream is really important. Otherwise, you don't know how to kind of place your interpretation. So the context was that I was starting to have a lot more psychic experiences, and I did feel that those kind of brought up certain fears in me, because I also identify as having a pretty logical mind, and I feel that on some level, unconsciously, there was some fears coming up about where is this information coming from, because I was interacting with forces that were kind of outside of my conscious mind's normal frame of reference. And I've talked about on YouTube about, different psychic experiences and intuitive experiences I've had throughout my life, but this was definitely an increase in the frequency. It was an increase in the accuracy. It was an increase in a lot of ways. And I just felt like I was working with so much more energy, that it was almost kind of intimidating at different points. And so that was kind of the context. That was kind of where I was at in my work when I had this dream. So I actually dreamed of a person in my family. She's my grandmother, actually. But in the dream, I had dreamt of her, and she had a wolf standing next to her that was very beautiful, and I could feel that the wolf was protecting her, and the wolf had these very beautiful blue eyes, and it was just this protector, this wild protector, that was by her side. And this person, my grandmother, she is, in my mind, she's always kind of been a little bit of a difficult person. She has some mental health issues and things like that. And so I felt that was significant as I, went into the symbols of this dream. But let's just stick with the dream itself. So we were standing outside by a fence made of black netting, which I highlighted the black netting and the word fence. There was a gate, which I highlighted, an opening behind me, and someone was coming through that I couldn't see. Then someone nudged me from behind and told me to get out of the way because someone was coming through and I was blocking the entrance. And that was actually the end of the dream. So it's a really short dream, but I wanted to share this one with you guys because I wanted you to see how much information even a very short dream, it's just a little snippet, can have for you. So the first symbol I took was my grandmother. And I wrote down all of the words that I associated with her, which, some of them are a little bit problematic because she's a problematic person in my life. So the words that I highlighted for her were the words insecurity, fear, and mental illness. And then the wolf, I wrote several things, but just to kind of speed it up, intuition and wisdom and wilds and heroic were the words that matched. And all of this stuff is also written down in the PDF. So don't worry if you feel completely lost right now, because it's all written out step by step in the PDF. So assuming you guys have read it, maybe you want to pause the video and come back if this is moving a little too fast for you. So the black, then there was the black netting, the fence, and what came up for me when I was kind of focusing on the actual symbol of the black netting of the fence was that the holes were quite large. It was almost like a black netting for a game of backgammon or something. So the holes were pretty big, and it wasn't just like a wall. It was very porous, very permeable. You could stick your fingers through it. And so I wrote separation but permeability between the side of the fence that we were on, and then beyond that fence there was wilderness, which that's another thing that can happen is as you're writing down your personal associations, you might start to remember some things. So I didn't write that in the first portion of the dream that I wrote down, but as I was working with it, I knew that there was wilderness on one side of the fence and that me and my grandmother and this wolf that was with her were on the other side. And so I worked with that symbol, which was the black netting. The gate, I wrote portal, place of connection, entrance or door between worlds, what connects two properties. And then I highlighted between worlds and place of connection. So those were my initial symbols that I chose to work with from this dream. I feel like it is important to work with all of the symbols that you remember in the dream. Some of them are going to be more like concepts, if that makes sense. So like the concept in here that I actually didn't write down, but it is. Okay, it is right here. It says being told to get out of the way. That's kind of like a concept. It's not really a noun, but it is a concept in the sense that what it reminded me of was actually, when you're at a grocery store or when you're kind of out and about and you're looking at something or reading something and somebody needs to kind of come up behind you and they need to like get past you, and for whatever reason they need you to like move aside. That's what it reminded me of, because it was almost like it reminded me of my partner standing next to me being like, oh, they want to come over, so just move over so they can get through. So it was kind of like that. But when I remembered that in this process of writing down my associations with this concept, I felt like, wow, that's really profound, because we were standing in front of this gateway or this break in the fence, and there's something coming up behind me and I'm being told to get out of the way and to let it come through, whatever it is to come through. And so this starts to get really interesting when you consider the symbolism of the wilderness that was on the other side of the fence. Now this is going to get into something like a collective symbol, which is good to know about, but it's not necessarily going to be this every time in your dreams. But one collective symbol that tends to come up for people is the idea of like wilderness representing something from your unconscious, because the unconscious part of your mind is almost like the wilderness, and then your conscious mind is kind of like the civilized version of you. So the fact that we were kind of standing next to this fence, and then on the one side there was a wilderness, on the other side it was kind of, I don't remember exactly where we were, but it was clear cut more. It was like we were on the civilized side of the fence, but then there's something coming up from the wilderness that wants to come through this gateway or come through this portal behind me, and I'm being kind of told to move out of the way so that it can come through. So that dream, what ended up happening, okay, so I'll just stick with the process. So then I took the personal associations from the first step is making all of the associations with the with each symbol, and they can be different. Like the wolf, I put intuition, wisdom, beauty, fear, forest, wild, heroic, hunter, carnivore, killer instinct, pet, moon, loyalty, spirit. So those are all really different. Those are just kind of associations that came up for me just as I was focusing on the symbol. The next step that you're going to do after you've gone through and listed all of these symbols and then written out kind of your random associations that you have for that symbol, just whatever words come up, then you're going to take it to the next level and take the words that rang true the most from that initial process of associations, and you're going to start asking yourself, how is this happening to me in my life? Or how do I feel this way? And so because one of my associations for my grandmother was fear, that was the association that I work with. So how am I experiencing fear or being insecure? And then I wrote about how I had been feeling more kind of insecure about this process of receiving more information psychically and becoming just more intuitive and feeling that process was happening really quickly. I wrote about a couple of other things in my life that were causing me like fear and insecurity. And then I moved on after I felt like I had gotten what I needed to out of that initial symbol of my grandmother. I went on to the symbol wolf, which is, I wrote, because I've connected the most to wise and loyal and intuitive. I wrote about that, about how I had been working with my intuition and how I actually had been meditating more and practicing, strategies to become more intuitive and listening to spiritual teachers like Eckhart Tolle and just working on myself. And so there was this insecure part of me, which was like the reason that my grandmother, I feel, was, used as the symbol is because my subconscious just associated her with like that kind of fear and that kind of uncertainty. And then my subconscious was also letting me know that I have this wolf with me, and that's also a part of myself, which is the protector, or this kind of wild creature, right? It's also a creature that belongs to the wild, which is on the other side of the fence, but it was there with me, protecting me. And so it kind of represented my own commitment to my personal growth, and the fact that I was, even though I felt like in certain ways this process of connecting more psychically and, feeling that process happening rapidly, even though that brought up some fears for me, it was also something that I was participating in, like it was, that's kind of what the wolf made me feel like. It also made me feel like I was protected. So that's kind of what I started to get from that. And then the black netting, the separate but permeability, and I was on the one side and the wilderness was on the other. I see this now as the permeable fence between my conscious and unconscious mind. So I wrote, this dream symbol seems to be saying, look, the boundaries are getting thinner and now there's an opening for someone to come through. So it was really a dream that was showing me that there was parts of me that were coming through, and that this wasn't something to be afraid of, that this was something that was a natural process, and that the fence being so permeable and sort of weak and, something that you could just probably knock down with your hand, it was just letting me know that there's connection there. Like, this is something that is coming more into my life. And, also that message about having somebody coming from behind me that I can't see and then being kind of asked to get out of the way, that really just made me feel that as I, like, in my personal associations for that, what I wrote about was that that I said, when I'm asked in real life to get out of the way, it's usually because I wasn't paying attention to what was going on around me. So this side of me that resists the present moment is being asked to step aside so that something new can take over, some element of me that is moon-wise, intuitive, and authentic, and not so afraid, like the wolf. I also remember that the wolf had really clear, sparkling blue eyes and a very white face, which makes me think of purity of perception. So what this dream I felt like was communicating to me is that it's okay, that this is a natural process, and that the part of me that has the fear that's coming up around this increase of psychic experiences that I was having, that part of me was also the same part of me that kind of needed to get out of the way. And that was a part of me that was more caught up in my head and thinking about things too much, and therefore not paying attention to what was going on around me. So it just kind of made me feel and realize that through the practices of meditation that I had begun at that time, and through all of the things that I was actively participating in, I was causing that growth myself, and that I was creating an environment in my inner world that was more connected. So if the fence had been a wall, that would have meant that there's still a blockage there between me and, whatever this wild consciousness is that wants to come through. But the fact that there's actually a gateway and that the fence itself is, very weak and porous, and just shows that I'm creating more, like at the time I was creating more connection between the different aspects of myself, which is healthy. So the dream gave me a lot of comfort. And it, obviously, as you can see, it gave me a lot of insight into what was going on for me on an inner level, even though it was such a short dream. So the basic interpretation I wrote was that I feel I'm being asked to step aside and surrender myself to this work. Let's see. It's kind of long, so I don't want to bore you guys, but yeah, so I've gotten the fence to be quite permeable, but it is me who stands with my back to the gate, unknowingly blocking the entrance. I need to move aside and let something other than my fears and concerns move me forward. So yeah, basically it was just letting me know that I'm on track, and that even as I contemplated the symbols with my grandmother, for example, even when I am, like, this was also another key message that I got from this dream, which is so comforting at the time, is it's that even when I am feeling insecure, or even when I am feeling afraid about things, I'm still protected, because I still had the wolf in the dream. You know, the wolf was standing next to her, protecting her, even though in the dream she seemed nervous and insecure. So that's how I worked through that dream. It is a 3-part process. So the first part is kind of writing out the dream and then writing out your personal associations. Again, that's just kind of like a drain of, you know, whatever words come to your mind as you focus on each symbol. At that point, you can also include the tarot cards. So I'll show an example of this. However, with this dream, I didn't really need it. I went back and did the tarot cards afterwards. So the card that came up for the symbol of my grandmother, and by the way, this brings me to another really important point, and I hope I'm not rambling too much, but when you dream of someone that you know, for example, like, you know, I dreamt of my grandmother, I knew that I wasn't actually dreaming about her. That was my unconscious using her as a symbol. And you know, I feel like that's something to also keep in mind in every dream that you interpret, is that a lot of the time you are dreaming about people as symbols for different aspects of yourself. However, there are times when you do actually dream about another person and your unconscious is telling you something about that person or about your relationship or your dynamic with that person. So you have to kind of use some discretion and intuition, and maybe you could use your tarot cards also to find out if you're actually dreaming about that person or if that person in the dream symbolizes a part of you. In my experience, it's probably 95% of the time your unconscious is using that person as a symbol for a part of yourself. However, you know, there is that other 5%. So sometimes it is that, you know, I'm actually dreaming about another person and how my relationship with them is developing, how there might need to be some adjustments there and things like that. So, but a lot of times your dreams are more focused on you because that's kind of what they're there for. At least in my experience, I feel that dreams are really there to help you learn more about yourself, and they're not really concerned about giving you, you know, advice to say, oh yeah, that person is in the wrong, like they're bad and you're right. Most of the time dreams, they just are very much upfront about like where you're at, and sometimes you might not always like the answers that you get, or sometimes you might not like the way that your own unconscious mind sort of depicts your conscious mind, but it's always kind of interesting. It's good to have a sense of humor a little bit as you look at your dreams, because they can be very subversive to your conscious attitude about life and your conscious personality. But anyway, so for the symbol of my grandmother, which is pointing to my own insecurity and fear, I got the 5 of Swords, which I wrote self-destruction. So there's kind of a sense of being at war with myself, or, you know, kind of being in a place of anxiety that isn't really getting me anywhere. There's not connection between a kind of like my true self and what's going on in the level of my mind, which is just, you know, overthinking things and feeling afraid. For the symbol of the wolf, I drew the King of Swords, which is a really awesome card, and I wrote clarity of perception. for this one. So the wolf, and even as I look at this card, I'm just amazed at how beautifully the tarot cards reflect what is going on in your dreams, because it really has that same sort of blue, clear, just very, very crisp ability to perceive the world. And that's, perfectly described by the King of Swords, and it really matches the symbol of the wolf and what it meant to me in my dream. It also has kind of a protector vibe, because he's got the sword up and he's comfortable, he's seated, just like the wolf was seated in the dream. So the wolf wasn't, in attack mode or anything, but it was standing calmly there, ready to fight if it needed to, but there wasn't any need. It was just kind of strength that was, standing with the symbol of the fear within me. So there was a strength and a perceptiveness that my unconscious mind was communicating to me that I also possess along with the fear. And then, so the black netting, the card that I drew for that was the Two of Swords. And this kind of made me feel like, because it's a two, it was a duality. And it's talking about kind of like the two worlds and how they cross over, because she has like the crossing of the swords. So it's my ability to perceive, in my conscious mind, but also whatever's going on in my unconscious mind, which was the wilderness beyond the fence. And those two worlds are kind of colliding in that dream. I also thought it was really interesting that so many swords cards came up for this dream, because it just shows that what I was really working on at the time that I had the dream was mental processes and figuring out how to define things in a more empowering way for myself, and not being afraid of things that are going on, sort of that are popping into my mind, with the work with my my tarot work that I was doing at the time. So, and then the last symbol in the dream that I pulled a card for was the Nine of Wands, and I pulled that for the gateway. So the gateway, the opening in the fence that we were standing next to. And so with this card, I do feel like, it just kind of has that vibe of the wilderness and somebody kind of standing in front of this gap. Again, it was really amazing to me that this card came up for that, because it's so perfect. But this guy's a little kind of scared. He's a little bit weary about what is coming through from the wilderness beyond the fence. But with this card in reverse, it's saying that there's not really a need to be afraid of that, or there's not really a need to feel the hesitation, that there is a way to kind of be consistent and persistent and careful with the work that I am doing, and sort of to ease into things. And that's kind of the energy that this card gave me, was, not needing to feel so worked up about it, not needing to feel so afraid about it. So again, this is really a personal course, and so it's been kind of funny and interesting to be sharing such personal things with you guys, like about my dreams and what context they have from my life, because it is just very personal. So I hope that this little dream example has been helpful to you in letting you know just how much information you can get from a very short dream if you know kind of how to work with these symbols and how to use your associations and how to look for the ones that really ring true the most, and then how to kind of go deeper into those. And there are more examples in the PDF. So I hope that is helpful to you guys, and always let me know if you have any questions. I also wanted to go over a couple more things with you guys, and I'm just checking my notes to make sure I don't forget anything. Okay, so potential pitfalls with this dream interpretation method. One of the bigger kind of pitfalls is if you were to, for example, and I wrote about this in the PDF that comes with this week, so you'll get more examples of this, but if you take a symbol, like for me, the wolf, if you take a symbol and then as you're kind of writing your initial associations with it, so these are the associations that might be conflicting with each other because they're just kind of coming up randomly as you're focusing on the symbol. If you were to take the wolf and then say, okay, the concept, or like as I focus on the symbol of the wolf, a forest is coming to mind. And then so you start thinking about the forest, and then you start thinking about squirrels, and then you start thinking about chestnuts or nuts that squirrels gather, and then you start thinking about winter and how to prepare for winter, and then you start thinking about the seasonal changes. That is the wrong way to do this, because what your unconscious mind did was it gave you the symbol it wants you to work with. So that symbol has kind of like a psychic charge to it, an energetic charge to it. And if you start going from that symbol initially and then kind of tapering off and going off in this other direction and thinking about completely different symbols, then that's going to be counterproductive, because what your unconscious did was it gave you a clear, okay, this is what you're meant to work with, or this is how we know how to communicate with you, or how I know how to communicate with you. And so you want to kind of stick with that original thing that your unconscious mind gave you, so that you can really get the message of that. So for example, I wrote intuition, wisdom, wild, and heroic. Those were the associations that rang true to me. And then I asked myself, where have I been feeling more intuitive or wise or wild or heroic? Or where am I feeling heroic? Where in my life does this make sense to me? And then I went from there. So I'm sticking with the original energy. There's like an energy to that symbol that I stick with that, and then I get the full message. But if I just kind of go, branching outward into just whatever other symbols that the wolf could potentially make me think of, then that's just going to give you a really muddled interpretation, because you don't know where to stop. You can just keep going forever. So that's one potential pitfall. Another potential pitfall that I have seen, and that I feel like it is really important to bring up, is overvaluing the unconscious mind. So a lot of times when we're getting into dream interpretation, or when we're getting into kind of other realms within ourselves, or doing inner work, it's really easy to start to kind of almost get lost in that world, or kind of feel like we are just, that all of our answers are going to come from there, and we start to kind of undervalue the conscious mind, and we start to undervalue the external life, and we overvalue the inner life. And that can be problematic, because we still need practical life skills. And so I like to sort of work with the unconscious as something that helps me. It's almost like a mirror. It's something that I can get extra information from, but it's not something that I, need to put all of my energy into all the time. It's something that is there to balance me, so that if my conscious attitude towards something is getting askew, like what happened when I had this dream, I was starting to feel more afraid of what was going on, when actually what was going on internally for me was a really good thing, and it was part of my personal growth and my evolution, both as a reader and just as a human being. And so that was a really good thing that was going on, but I wasn't able to really access that, because my conscious mind was afraid of certain aspects of it, or suspicious, like, where is this information coming from? Like I mentioned about the increasing psychic experiences, there was fear that was brought up around that for me from my conscious mind. And so this dream kind of happened to balance that attitude that I had. Now, if I was overvaluing the psychic experiences that I was having, and if I was becoming obsessed with them, or kind of making them just out to be this really intense, bigger thing than they were, then maybe the dream would have done the opposite thing. Like, I would have probably had a dream that was letting me know, okay, it's time to pull back a little bit and not focus so much on the unconscious realm. So it doesn't matter. The unconscious doesn't kind of play favorites. It doesn't have any sort of motivation for itself. It really is just you. It's a deeper part of you that is balancing your conscious self. So that's one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about dream interpretation, is that it's actually... it's kind of like a place that you can go within yourself that you can't really bullshit it for pardoning my language. You can't really just do things and be fake in your dreams. Like, your dreams are just your dreams. They're just going to tell you whatever you need to hear. Even if it's difficult to hear, they're just going to be really honest and upfront with you. So if you are somebody who, for example, this comes up a lot in Carl Jung's work, but if you're somebody who has like really high ambitions, and somebody who maybe even is a little bit cocky or overcompensating for things, or thinking like you're trying to reach for higher than what you can actually sort of manage at this time, or that you're morally kind of able to do, then your dreams will kind of counterbalance that by making you seem like smaller, or they will try and make you your dreams will communicate things that kind of try and take you down a peg. So you'll dream of, things that are really humiliating for yourself or something like that. But that's the other challenging thing with compensation, which I did write about in your PDF this week, is that with compensation, it is kind of tricky because, for example, you might be having a dream that you are, where a humiliating thing happens to you. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are being cocky and kind of just prideful in your conscious life. It doesn't necessarily mean that. Sometimes compensation can occur by taking an attitude that you currently hold to an extreme level. So in that example, if you're somebody who's very humble and very kind of like, oh, don't look at me, like I'm behind the scenes, I just help out, then your dream could show you like an extreme of that. You could dream about extremely humbling experiences, extremely humiliating experiences, and things of that nature, because your unconscious is, for whatever reason, it's trying to balance you by showing you how extreme your approach is. So that's another thing that you can watch for when you're doing dream interpretation for yourself. Keep in mind that there aren't any rules. There's no rules that your unconscious follows that says, okay, we're just going to show you the opposite of what you're doing. Sometimes it's a more extreme version of what you're doing to kind of try and get your attention, to let you know, hey, you're taking your humility to an extreme level here. So, it's time to kind of have a little bit more confidence, or stand up a little straighter, or be more okay with yourself. And you'll see the beauty of dream interpretation, especially if you do this consistently over time. You'll start to see that over a series of dreams, something will be rectified. So if you have a very clear dream that lets you know there's an issue in some area of your life. So for example, you might dream of a house and all of the front of the house is clean, but then the basement is just full of clutter, and it's just this dark, scary world down in the basement or something like that. Then you might get, from your free associations and from working with your dream symbol and all of that, you might discover, okay, the basement represents my unconscious, and it represents, all the clutter in there represents things from my childhood, because all the boxes were things from childhood. So now I know that there's something I need to work through in regards to this painful thing from my past. Then let's say you start journaling about it, or you work with a therapist, or you get rid of some things from your actual, real physical home, not in your dream life. You will actually find that you can dream again the next night, or a week later, or a month later, or however long it takes you to kind of work through that. You could have a dream that the basement is now clean. And so I'm just using that as a really simple example, but that's how dreams work. So they rectify, if you have for example, if you dream of something and you accurately kind of interpret it, and then the next night your dream will either let you know kind of that you've dealt with it, or, maybe a week later it will. But if you don't accurately interpret it, if your interpretation actually isn't what your unconscious is trying to tell you, your unconscious will give you another dream that has a very similar feeling, or it'll make corrections in your interpretation. So that is something that will happen over time. If you work with your dreams consistently, you'll start to understand which symbols your unconscious typically uses for you, and you'll start to have almost like a shorthand where you don't have to pull cards to let you know kind of the energy of the dream symbol. You'll start to just kind of know, okay, I'm dreaming of that house. For me, I dream often of a house in Santa Monica, California. I don't know why. It's not a house I've ever been to, but it's a really common symbol, and it only comes up in my dreams when I am working through like a big strategy for the next stage of my life. And I've dreamt about it multiple times, and each time it's a little bit different in terms of what I'm working on. So the floor plan will be different. Or one time I dreamt of it and part of like the side of the house was sagging a little bit. So there was something wrong with the foundation. So I had to, when I was interpreting that dream, I realized I needed to fix that. And there was windows in different places on the house. So then, there was a different interpretation for that. So I just wanted to kind of communicate that this is just the beginning of your dream journey. If you're somebody who, even if you have been writing down your dreams, but you haven't been going through with this much detail of each symbol and what it means to you and pulling cards for each symbol as needed, even if you haven't been going that deeply into your dreams, if you start doing this, I feel that pretty strongly, you will have something that like this, something that continues for you along. And so you'll have common themes, or you'll notice common motifs that your dreams like to use. And it just gets easier and easier to understand what's going on. So yeah, that's just another really awesome benefit of doing dream work that is like this. And maybe some of you guys already have had this experience either with recurring dreams or symbols that come up regularly. It can be really helpful to just kind of look at each symbol and go through whatever your associations are with it in a very free-flowing way, and then work from whichever one or several that ring true to you in that moment, and then allowing the dream interpretation to flow from that. Even though it is more detailed, so it does take more time, it's something that can really add a lot of value to your life. Over the long term, I have been able to learn so much about myself with this process. And again, there's a million ways to do this. This is just how I do it. This is how I find it, to be the most helpful. So that's why I'm sharing it here. And there's more information in the PDF about kind of sample dream interpretation spreads and a whole process with a different dream, so you guys get some different points of view on how you can do this. Please let me know if you have any questions, if there's anything that you want to know about tarot and dream interpretation. You can always post in the private Facebook group, or you are welcome to send me an email directly. I would be super happy to answer any questions that you have. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.